Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. And again, apologies for the slight delay. We got it all sorted out. Um, and I see that we have about a dozen folks on Zoom and about 20 people in here, which is great. We are super excited today to have with us Dr. Piers Kelly for today's special colloquium in anthropology entitled The Enduring Legacy of Arnold R. Pilling's Anthropological Fieldwork in Australia's Tiwi Islands, Message Sticks, Oral History, and Trailblazing Research Methods Confirmation. Today we will be hearing more about our museum's co-founder, Dr. Arnold Pilling, and his work with the Tiwi of Bathurst and Melville Islands in Australia's Northern Territory, with whom Dr. Kelly has also worked extensively. He has been here at Wayne State today, conducting some really interesting archival research, and we're just extremely enthused that he's able to join us today to give his talk. Dr. Kelly is a DECRA Fellow in the School of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences at the University of England in New South Wales, Australia. He is a linguistic anthropologist who completed his PhD in linguistics at the Australian National University. Dr. Kelly's research focuses on writing and notation and graphic codes with a focus on small-scale societies in Australia and the Philippines. He is the author of the monograph, The Last Language on Earth, Linguistic Utopianism, which is a historical ethnography of the contested Eskayan language and script of the southern Philippines. It was published by Oxford University Press a couple of years ago and was recently the winner of the New Voices Book Prize for 2023 for the Society for Linguistic Anthropology. He curates the Australian Message Stick database, which is a really important repository, a meta-repository for over 1,400 message sticks and their depictions found in museums and archives throughout the world, which just this week was published in the prestigious journal Post One. And it's a very good article. I liked it. So please welcome me today and join me in welcoming our speaker, Dr. Piers Kelly.
Oh, can you work on it?
Yeah, I'm going to use this one afraid. Maybe not. Can you do it with this one? Yeah. It's covering up the letters.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to be talking about Arnold Remington Pilling, why his research is important to me and why it's important to Tiwi people in Australia today. Pilling joined Wayne State University as a staff member in 1957. He became a full professor of anthropology in 1970 and remained in the Department of Anthropology until his death in 1994. I assume you all know of him, but I'm kind of interested if anyone here knew him personally or has met him or... No, okay, good. Well, if I say anything that contradicts your understanding, please go ahead and interrupt me or share your own thoughts. And I don't mind if anyone wants to interrupt at any point for any reason. So very quickly, I'm a linguistic anthropologist, as Steve said. This is how I know Steve. And my research interest is in material symbolic codes with an emphasis on those used in smaller scale societies. Okay. So material symbolic codes can be things like these. All of these are part of highly conventionalized communicative systems, but they don't represent language. So you can't narrowly call any of these on the screen, you can't call them writing. Nonetheless, they tend to work together with spoken language in a communicative routine. And they often achieve the sorts of things that writing achieves. They can extend or constrain meaning, they might record quantities or genealogies, or they might stabilize certain kinds of discourses and authorize particular kinds of social relations. I'm from Australia, where there's a long history of material symbolic codes used by Indigenous people who have occupied that continent for at least 65,000 years. So these practices include rock paintings and petroglyphs, body paint, body scarring, artifact design like shields, and sand drawing narratives. And all of these things are expressed differently among the 400 or so different cultural and linguistic groups in Australia. So that's to give you a sense of the diversity. The Australian system that interests me especially is Message Stick. So here's our research team on the Australian Message Stick project, and we're all holding Message Sticks, and we have research partners in Germany as well. Dr. Lorena Barker is the woman in the middle. She's an oral historian looking at message sticks that belong to a specific songline or ceremonial path that extends from Queensland into South Australia, including her traditional country. So what are message sticks? These are marked wooden artefacts that come in all shapes and sizes, usually engraved, sometimes pigmented. They have traditionally been used for conveying messages between different language groups over long distances. These messages are sometimes about conveying news, but most often it's for coordinating movements of people and resources, very typically for authorising and organising large ceremonial gatherings. That's the kind of main message on a message stick, statistically. The way it unfolds is that you have a person sending the message who makes a message stick and marks it with symbols. They give the message stick to a messenger and tell them what the message is. The messenger takes it across a political border, or linguistic border too, and delivers the message orally and uses the stick to authenticate, corroborate, or reinforce aspects of the spoken message. Sometimes the graphic symbols and oral message overlap very clearly. Other times they diverge. There can be information on the stick that is not in the oral message, and there's very often information delivered orally that doesn't get represented in visual form. Here's a calendrical style message stick that is designed to coordinate a large ceremony. It was sent around to various clans within 2 language groups. You can see them on either side. And the idea was to make sure that everyone got to the ceremonial ground at the same time. Ceremonial ground being the dot in the middle. Okay, and so distance, time, and clan language groupings are represented here, but it's also doing other things. It's also authorising the movements of those people, for example. At the time of contact with the British and other outsiders, message sticks were used everywhere on the continent. So these are just the instances that I've plotted so far, but there are many hundreds I haven't put on the map yet, and I can confirm that the only places you don't find message sticks are Tasmania, down in the south there, and parts of Central and Western Australia, and there may be a few other small regions, but they're all over. Message sticks could also travel quite a long way. Here's a very long journey that took place in the early 20th century that I've been able to plot, and it travelled about 1,026 miles, so it went back again as well along that route. Some of them travelled really short distance. There's even just the line of sight between 2 camps could be that short. It's not clear how old this tradition of communication really is. It's very hard to date. There are no archaeological examples, simply because the Australian climate and soils are unkind to timber. There are very few surviving wooden artefacts of any kind older than 200 years in Australia. So if you want to see message sticks, they're in museums, and they were collected in the colonial period. The earliest recorded eyewitness accounts of message sticks are from the 1840s. And it may be possible to gaze back further by looking at oral histories, traditional stories, and linguistic reconstructions of terms in message stick. Realistically, though, for most of the continent of Australia, we have to rely on written archives, written observations in archives. But message sticks were used in a traditional way up until the late 1970s and maybe early 1980s in what's known as the top end, which is this region on the left. So it's that bobbly bit of the state. So within my lifetime, and this is where I'm focusing my field work with elderly rememberers of this system, at least as it was practiced in those places, so people like Kevin Jr. In the Tiwi Islands, which you can see circled in the sort of northwest of that map, they're the 2 large islands close to the mainland. The message stick system was going out of use in the 1950s, I believe. There are no longer people alive who remember the system, but I've been doing oral history recordings of stories that are passed down, particularly with a man called the Tungatan. There he is there. And this is how I came into contact with Arnold Pilling's work. Pilling did fieldwork for his PhD on Bathurst Island between 1953 and 1954, and he was awarded a PhD from Berkeley in 1958. I got hold of a microfiche of his thesis there on the left through a kind of fortunate clerical error. They were never supposed to send it to Australia, they did by accident, so I digitised it with permission. And it's riveting stuff. It turns out that Pilling's main consultant, Burma Yilimiri, known to him as Kabaji, is the grandfather of Beeb Tumatala pictured there. So Beeb complained to me that his grandfather and other old men told him nothing about message sticks. But nonetheless, he has quite a lot of stories about them that have been handed down to him. So I read Pilling's work because I was interested in learning how his Tiwi consultants at the time in the 1950s, how they talked about message sticks. Because, there's no archaeology. And Pilling was there just at the time that the system was being abandoned, I believe, because the next generation would not use message sticks. Pilling wrote his thesis as an exercise in comparative law. He was interested in understanding the legal system of Tiwi Islanders and how they traditionally dealt with crime and enacted appropriate punishments or negotiated compromises. Unfortunately, we know that I've learned just today by looking at his notebooks that he took lots of photographs. The whereabouts of those photographs are unknown for now. Hopefully they'll turn up somewhere in the archive. So I've got no pictures anyway that I can show you of him on the islands. But what he did collect was 234 stories of legal disputes and their resolutions, of which only 107 made it into his thesis. So I'm hoping that there in the Ruta archive, some of these will find the remainder. Some of these disputes and legal repercussions were ones that he witnessed directly while he was there. Most others were remembered vividly within Tiwi oral tradition. And in fact, 47 of these stories took place prior to sustained contact with white missionaries from 1911 onwards. So he wrote all these accounts down as if they were legal cases. With the crime, the outcome, and so on. It gives them case numbers as well, just like a legal document. So this one here is really short, some go for several pages. And some of these crimes are familiar: murder, theft, kidnapping, that sort of thing. Others are quite culturally distinctive: failure to remember ceremonial songs, failure to share food with the appropriate kin relations, and so on. These cases sometimes involve arguments and deliberation over details because perhaps unlike stories that might be told for entertainment or moral value, dispute stories require a degree of consensus and fidelity. Communities tend to be motivated to maintain a hard-nosed empirical attitude, which doesn't mean they get everything right, and it doesn't mean that erroneous versions of events might prevail. My point is that in collecting legal cases over this period of 18 months that he was on the islands, Pilling was also recording rich oral histories and doing so collaboratively in a very rigorous way, which included estimates of dates and estimates of sequences of events. So this must have happened before that and so on, because it includes this person who wasn't born yet, that sort of thing. And he goes into a great deal of detail about how to culturally translate this material, how to evaluate accuracy, and how to deal with internal inconsistencies and conflicting reports. I'll come back to that maybe a little bit at the end. So you can read the thesis as comparative law or as legal ethnography, but that's almost the most boring way of interacting with this work. I read it as a work of collaborative oral history. Now, message sticks are not a big part of the thesis, but the work really clarified a few things for me. Firstly, Tiwi people today say that message sticks don't really belong to their islands and that they were introduced from the mainland. And this is corroborated by Pilling's oral history, where he quite convincingly shows that message sticks entered the islands at around 1915 with the advent of the buffalo trade, buffalo hunting. Non-Aboriginal water buffalo hunters came over to the islands at this time in the company of Iwaija men, whose traditional country was on the mainland. So it was the Iwaija who introduced message sticks, among other things. Interestingly, the Iwaija, among some of the very few groups where women were known to serve as official messengers. Almost everywhere else in Australia, being a messenger was for men only. But when the Tiwi Islanders adopted message sticks, Tiwi women were appointed as messengers as well as Tiwi women. Pilling did in fact collect at least 7 message sticks, and these are still held at the Phoebe A. Hearst Museum in Berkeley. And these photos here have literally been made available at the museum just to that. So you're among the first people outside the museum to see these, as a consequence of me pestering the stuff. So these are all collected by him, and there are some accession documents that I haven't looked at yet. Hopefully more information there. So the collection is actually closed to prioritise NAPRA, but we're hoping that we'll be able to at least look at the documentation and share that. It's maybe a shame that Pilling didn't bring them here to Detroit to be part of the collection that he founded here, but it's possible he was making the calculation that Berkeley had the resources to maintain them at the time. So the year after Pilling left Bathurst Island, 1955, the anthropologist C.P. Mountford visited, and because he was very interested in art and symbolism, he inquired much more directly about message sticks and collected many examples and glossed them. So here are some of the ones that from the Tiwi Islands that Mountford collected. And a few of these have survived in museums. Almost all of these are topographical, so they represent geographic features relevant to clan estates, totemic groups, and ceremonial grounds. And here's one that's lost. I won't read all of that out, but you can see all the little notations point to features of the main road. But this message stick is a call for ceremony, for a mortuary ceremony, in fact. But that's the point I made earlier. You don't see any evidence of the ceremony on the stick, so you have to know what the oral message is that was attached to it. Okay. So thanks to Pilling, the Tiwi Islands is perhaps the only part of Australia where we can pretty positively track the diffusion of the message system into the region in 1915, and that the last recorded cases of message sticks used in a traditional way are these ones sketched here from 1955 from Mountford. So that's a span of just 40 years where this tradition was used in the islands. Here are a few stories about message sticks from Pilling. And remember, these are written as legal cases, so that's the reason for the kind of stilted language. That afternoon, the fight started in another place, Angaryu of Country 3. He labels other countries Country 3 so that he doesn't write 4 or 5, so he doesn't have to write them out. Became wild and got his spears. He wounded Antonio. Durhamby of Country 1, Antonio's father, was talking with Johnson of Country 3. Durhamby said to Johnson, "You two go now. I go look after my son." As Johnson left, Durhamby speared him through the back. Johnson carved a message stick to summon the people of Country 8, where he'd been born. Mulungina took the message to Bulungaji, the Clan 11 leader of Country 8. Country 9 leader also looked at the message stick and decided to send fighters from Clans 12 and 13 to oppose the Clan 11 men sent by Country 8. So it's quite complex, all the different clans and all the different countries, but there's a degree of coordination that has to go on to figure out how to resolve this dispute. This is actually just a little snapshot. The whole thing goes by pages. But this is the bit that involves the message stick, so you can see what's going on. Okay, and the things I put in red are just the things that interest me especially. A man from Melbourne Island came to Bathurst Island to arrange his marriage. The Melbourne Islander died upon his return home. The assertion made at the time was that he had been poisoned with marula. The initial offence was murder by magical means. The Melbourne Islanders probably suspected the Bathurst Islanders had poisoned. The Melbourne Island tribe, probably Country 9, demanded that one of the Bathurst Island males be sent over for punishment. A warrior came to Bathurst Island mission with a message to the leader of Country 1. The injured party suggested a settlement for the initial offence. Shortly after receiving the message, the Bathurst Island men held a meeting. So this is a what's called in Aboriginal English a payback event. So when someone dies unexpectedly, it's assumed that someone was responsible for that from another clan. Someone then has to be punished for that. Sometimes it's death, but in this case, it was resolved. So the message stick was instrumental in resolving that without punishment, with deliberation. Okay. I won't go through all this. Maybe I'll do a short one. So Clan 13 camp was awaiting a chance to avenge the injury of Kabaji. So that's the Tunatalam's grandfather. Kabaji returned from the hospital. He declared that clans 13, 14, and 15 had a new name, Dagariga. This was to indicate their renewed unity. Kabaji sent a message stick with his Kalabini, one grandfather brother. Duna to Snake Bay to ask Plan 14 to come and aid Plan 13. When the members of Plan 14 arrived, they whispered around that they were fighting only for Cabbagee's infamy. So again, it's used in dispute resolution, and Cabbagees very cleverly tried to rearrange social relations to avoid a negative outcome. All right, so where are we up to? So all of these stories are much longer and more involved if you look at Pilling's work. I've just extracted the parts of them where message 6 are mentioned, but they represent, I guess, important political events on these islands. For most of these stories, Pilling's work is the only documentation of those events, and given that some of this is intergenerational, like massively intergenerational, we've got events as early as 1818. So the level of detail for oral history for some of this is extraordinary. 1818 is 100 years before the mission, so 100 years before any sustained contact with anyone who was going to write anything down. Okay, and they go as late as 1954 up until the last point that Pilling was on the islands. So that's when I want to talk about the wider value of the archive. Okay, Pilling did not anonymise his consultants, which turns out to have been a great decision because these were his consultants, and these names are recognised by descendants. There's even more than this. These are just the ones mentioned in his thesis by name, but then it'll be, and the brother of so-and-so was there. In his notebooks, there are so many names. Okay. So all of these, so these are recognised by descendants, and all these individuals have passed away. But for any Australians who might be listening to this now or in the future, these names are okay to represent and inform that the period of mourning has passed for all of them. You're not supposed to represent the names of the deceased until the mourning period has gone. So Tiwi Islanders are, of course, very interested in their own history. Mavis Karanawa, who wrote this recent book with Laura Rademacher, is indeed a professional historian, as is Laura. Mavis is very interested in the materials that Pilling left behind here in the Rupert Archive, and some of the priorities that she mentioned for her and for her community are things like the possible documentation of cultural practices that are undergoing revitalisation today. And there's an interest in doing things properly. So when you're doing cultural revitalisation, this is when you really want to look closely at records. And I can confirm that having looked at the notebooks today, I've seen detailed descriptions of salient cultural practices like ceremony, body paint, and so on. And less obvious cultural practices like modes of interaction, dispute resolution, those sorts of things. And Pilling's finished dissertation also gives lots of detail about exactly that, the dispute resolution as a cultural practice. He's also got a lot of detail about clan estates and their boundaries, which is the sort of thing that's relevant to the Tiwi Land Council and manages things like rights, access, cultural heritage, that sort of thing. Pilling left behind at least 50 notebooks that are clearly written and clearly labelled. So in addition to his thesis, the hope is there is more material of local value in there. And I mentioned those, that there remain 127 cases, legal cases, that didn't make it into his thesis. By the way, I'd originally believed that there were 108 notebooks, and I said this to you. But I'm almost certain that that was a typo. So I was scanning his thesis, looking for reference to notebooks in Roman numerals. The highest number I found was 108. But then there's nothing between 50 and 108. And there's nothing actually in the Rupert Archive between 50 and 108. So it's either going to be 8, 18, 28, 38, and we'll figure it out based on the context. So, which is kind of a relief, I guess. I wasn't really looking forward to trying to read 108. Okay, at the moment, me, Laura, Steve, Krista, Tiwi Land Council are kind of just doing basic groundwork to see if and how Pilling's Tiwi archive can be perhaps accessioned, digitised and made accessible to Tiwi Islanders at some point in the future. We're looking into what needs to happen next and what resources might be available. One of the things that Indigenous Australians are justifiably worried about when an archive like this comes to light is, are there any details that should not be public? And we're not talking about scandals and embarrassment. Traditional knowledge in Australia is very segmented. Certain people of a given age or gender or totem or initiation status are holders of certain kinds of socially segmented knowledge. And this knowledge must never be shared with individuals of an incompatible social category. And this is where I think they're in luck, because it's evident that Pilling was very respectful about what he recorded and what he chose not to record. And he made his consultants aware of what he was doing. And it was not their first rodeo either. They had interacted with anthropologists in the past. So he talks about stories that were not available to him for cultural reasons, and which he didn't then press his consultants on. Other anthropologists in Australia at that time, including C.P. Mumford, were not so respectful. And they didn't care about cultural restrictions, either through plain arrogance or the assumption that the Aboriginal people they were interacting with were never going to read their work. So they assumed it was okay. Pilling did not have that attitude, and his general methodological approach was, I think, quite ethical and progressive for its time. He was all of 27 and 28 years old when he came to Australia, with very poor guidance from his Australian mentors, in my opinion. But long before the subjective turn in anthropology, had the self-awareness to try to chart his limitations as an ethnographer and to recognise his consultants as colleagues with existing skills in oral history documentation. So here he's interested in what the markers of reliability of a narrative are from an insider's perspective, not from his own perspective as an ethnographer. He goes on for pages and pages. I've just grabbed the first thing I could find. Pages on the nature of what is regarded as accurate and inaccurate with a kind of accompanying typology of validity. So he never assumes an objective empirical stance. He talks about when or when it is not appropriate to, for example, misrepresent the facts of a case. So I think this is, for me, pretty cutting edge for someone in their 20s in the 1950s. Often when you read a thesis from that period of time, you get a lot of bravado. You know, I learnt the language, I knew everything, I've got the truth, and he's always aware of his position, I think. And I would love to talk more of this. I ran out of time in preparation. Some of the things that I was really impressed in his thesis were these sorts of things, but especially the way he observed other people. So his main consultant, Cabbagew, training others, he observed them training in his methods. And so there's this kind of horizontal transmission of ethnographic methods going on within the community and then back to him. And he even gives a kind of a transcription of one of these training sessions where Cabbagew is saying, you know, you want to give it to him like he's a policeman. So he's going to want to know names. So you don't forget to miss the name, like things like that. So his consultants are also aware of their positionality, and they know what white people will ask about, but they also know that Pilling is asking about different kinds of things that other people are not going to ask about. So it's really fascinating to read all of that. It's all in the first, 20 or 30 pages of the thesis. So I have run out of time. I could talk about this for ages, but I'll end it there. So if you've got any questions, please hear that.